All right, welcome. Let's go ahead and get started. I am Ginny McGee, and I am the instructional designer in the e-learning division. And we have a small group. I think we might have one more person joining us. I'm actually just going to keep my video off only because I am recording this to put in the Canvas Faculty Hub. So I don't want my face as part of that recording. But I do have everyone available to unmute yourself. If you have a question or a comment at any point in time, please feel free to do that. If you can, just keep yourself muted if you're not speaking, just so we don't get background noise. But if at any time, just raise your hand, or you can just unmute and just talk, and I'm happy to answer, or if you have a comment. All right, so let's go ahead and get started today. So we're going to be talking about, to begin with, why discussions. So why are discussions so important? Do you really have to use them in an online class? We're going to talk about facilitation. So your role as the facilitator of the discussion, when and when not to use discussion. So there's a lot of great reasons why you would want to use a discussion, but there's also times when a discussion is probably not the best vehicle for what you're trying to accomplish. And then we're going to spend a lot of our time on prompts that work. So how to create discussion prompts that are actually going to get students to discuss. All right, so let's start with, are discussion boards really necessary in an online class? And I would say, yes, they are. And there's a lot of research just on the nature of learning. If you are at all, if you've had education classes, you've probably talked about social learning theory and good old Vygotsky and his constructivist approach to learning. But basically, there's a lot of research that shows that people naturally learn collaboratively. So we learn from and with each other better than we learn in isolation. And in an online class, discussion boards are one of the biggest ways that we can have that collaboration happen. That being said, we do want to use discussions strategically. And when we do that, they are a vital part of online learning. And they really can elevate an online course from okay, good, fine, to extraordinary. So strong, robust discussions can really take your online course to the next level. There's a lot of research that has showed that students have higher satisfaction with a course when there are quality discussion boards that are part of it. So students feel that they've learned more when there are good discussions. And it builds a sense of community. And this is something that sounds good that we want to do in our online courses, but there's actually a lot of research that shows that a sense of community builds student persistence. So students may have a lot of reasons why they go to school, their learning needs, their career goals are what attracts them to a higher education program, but it's not always enough to retain them in that education program. So building a sense of community really enhances student persistence and can cause them to hang in there and get their degree rather than getting frustrated or feeling isolated and dropping out. And of course, we want to make sure that we have students that are persistent in achieving their educational goals. And discussion boards are also a means to instructor presence. So they are not going to be focused on the instructor, the discussion boards, but it is a way for students to know that, yes, there is somebody on the other side of that screen that is teaching the class. It's not just them and a computer. So let's talk a little bit about characteristics of effective discussion boards. So they're going to be fit for purpose, meaning they have a purpose, they are intentional, and they are designed to fit that purpose. So they're going to be clearly connected to the student learning objectives for the course. And again, there's a purpose for them. So we're not just kind of throwing it in there as some busy work or something that we just want students to do, but they are clearly connected to the objectives for the course. Effective discussion boards are student-centered. So of course, we're going to talk about your role as a facilitator in discussions, and it is very important, but we want discussions to be centered on the students and the students communicating with each other. We want them to be scaffolded. So providing students with models of a work, examples that they can follow, cues that guide them in the right direction, because we don't want to assume that students are going to know what's expected of them in a discussion board. So we have to make sure that we provide them with that support. Again, they are facilitated, and we're going to talk more about this. An effective discussion board is going to be sourced. So if you're expecting students to be able to comment on something, they're going to need to have some, unless it's just a get to know you type discussion board, you're going to want to provide them with resources that are going to give them context for that discussion so that they can give an intelligent response and feel like they are prepared to put themselves out there with a discussion post. They are assessed. So this is something that I was reading a lot about in preparation for this. And so obviously not all discussions are going to be assessed. There are certain types of discussion boards that you're not going to be grading. But I thought it was pretty interesting. One study that I read said that it really is important, as much as we would love for students to just want to jump in and participate in discussion boards just for the joy of learning. We know that's not realistic, and they really do need that extrinsic motivation of knowing that they are going to get a grade. And I thought it was interesting that there was an increase in a sense of classroom community for courses where discussions accounted for 10 to 20% of the course grade. So just 10% is enough to motivate students to want to participate in the discussions. And there weren't any additional benefits when the weight was increased to 25 to 35%. So that's the fact that I thought was interesting. So it's not like it has to be a huge portion of how you're arriving at students' grades, but even having that 10% of the course grade being discussions really motivates them to participate. And of course, the more they're participating in the discussions, the better sense of community they have with their classmates. So facilitation is really important. And this is something that I did already know, but the more I read about it, the more this point was really driven home, that students participate more with high quality facilitator contributions. And one of the articles I read said that in discussions in courses where the instructor is not reading posts, responding, it kind of feels like the student is just writing a message and putting it in a bottle and throwing it in the ocean and hoping, but having no idea if anybody is ever reading it, getting no feedback on it, and having no idea how they performed or who, if anyone got anything out of what they wrote. So we definitely don't want students to feel like their contributions are never being read. So here's just some ideas, and I know that many instructors are teaching multiple courses, multiple online courses possibly. And so I don't want to give you suggestions that are not feasible, but commenting just once per day on a discussion board while it's active is very effective, because students can see that yes, you are looking over what's being written, you are weighing in when necessary, but you want to avoid becoming the focus of the discussion thread. So you don't want the students to be posting to you in the most part. You want them to be posting for each other and to each other. One great way, though, to try to include everyone is to try to respond to each student just once a semester directly. And again, you could post to the whole class, but if you're posting or responding directly to each student at least once a semester, that helps them to feel seen by you and really helps them to feel like they are a part of that community. If you do, in the online class that I've taught, I've done weekly videos where I kind of recap the week before and I talk about what's coming up in the next week. And as part of that, I would usually try to just jot down one or two things that students said in the discussion for the week, if there was a discussion that week. And I would mention them by first name and say, as Sean mentioned, and say what they said and talk about why I thought that that was a good point, or maybe add to something that they said. And again, it doesn't take a lot of time. I would just have a notebook as I went through the discussion posts and just kind of jot a couple things down and then mention it in the video. So it's not time consuming at all, but it helps students feel like you are seeing them and reading their posts. And again, we want to encourage student-to-student interaction. So it's very tempting when you see something, maybe a misconception or a question, to just dive right in there and answer it. It's hard to resist that urge as an instructor. But it's important not to respond too quickly to a post. Give it a little bit of time, give it a day, so that other students may respond for you. And you'd be surprised how often students can steer a classmate in the right direction or answer a question. And then, of course, you can obviously weigh in. You don't want to leave some big misunderstanding on a discussion board, but a lot of times students can really interact and learn from each other without you having to come in and do it for them. And another thing that you can do is have follow-up questions prepared. And so instead of just making statements and answering questions for them directly, which could end up kind of just ending the conversation there, if you can ask probing follow-up questions, provide encouragement, those types of things, so students know you are there, you're aware of what's happening, but they are really responsible for continuing that conversation. And if you have those thoughtful follow-up questions prepared ahead of time, you may or may not end up using them depending on how the discussion goes, but you will have them in case you do need them to sort of spur that conversation along. So that being said, we do want to use discussions wisely. So I'm not going to read this whole quote here, but it is important when you're designing your course and you're thinking about where you want your discussions to be and what you want them to be about, to ask yourself, why am I putting this into a discussion? So if all you're trying to do is to gauge whether they're attending, or if you are wanting to determine whether a student read the textbook chapter or watched your recorded lecture or did their homework, a discussion board is not the best tool for that. That's not really what the discussion board is for. Instead, you probably would be better off just creating an assignment, or you could do a quiz, and that will give you better information about whether or not they just read the chapter. Forums or discussion boards that require students to have to track down sources, to use those higher level Bloom skills, which we're going to talk about shortly, to analyze what they've learned and offer different perspectives. That's the objective of a discussion board. So we don't want the discussions to turn into just busy work that don't have a purpose. If you've got, 13 weeks of an online class, that doesn't mean that you have to have 13 discussions. You're better off having 4 or 5 robust discussions than 13 tedious threads that students just kind of hate doing, and they just do it because it's a box they have to check. All right, so now if we look at this discussion, and I tried to kind of use discussion prompts from different areas, and so this would be more of like a science or a math prompt. But if I put this into a course and expected students to comment on this and just said, correlation does not imply causation, and obviously this would be based on a reading, explain what this means in your own words. Would this be a good discussion prompt? And if you would like to share, feel free to unmute yourself and tell me your thoughts.
Okay, I'll bite.
All right. Thanks, Howard.
Yeah, but I think what you're missing on this thing is I can get students to respond back to correlation. There's that implied causation. They're very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can go ahead and I can post my comments either individually, and it's one of the things I don't like about Canvas, because when I comment on an individual student's posting, the other students cannot see that. And what I have done is I've gone back to the original posting, and when I go through this, I make a list of my comments, and I post all my comments so all my students can see it. The issue I have with discussions is I can't get a second comment out of the students. I can't get an ongoing discussion.
Right. Right. And that is something, you're right. A lot of one statistic I read is that like most discussions that students have their one post and their one response to someone else, and that's it. And you're correct. Now in Canvas, you're saying like in SpeedGrader,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
they can't see.
Yeah, I've called Canvas Help, and they've confirmed that's the way it works.
Right. So in order for students to be able to see your comments, you would have to actually post them in the discussion board as well, which you said you put all of your, I like that method of putting all of your comments into a post in the discussion thread. Is that what you're saying you do?
Right, but the negative of that is I usually wait until the discussions, the due date for the discussions, and then I grade them all at once. From what I'm hearing from your advice, I should probably be doing this on a daily basis. If something is posted, make a comment.
Right. So that's kind of what, and again, this isn't something I'm expecting you to comment on every post every day, or that's what the research is suggesting. But what I've seen from the studies that have been done on what really encourages students is if you even just post once a day to a new post, or however long, it depends on how long your discussions are open for. But that really lets students know that you are there, that you are reading as they are posting, and can encourage them to continue the conversation.
Yep, you got it.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much for weighing in. And I do like your idea of putting your comments, that might be helpful as well for kind of informing students how to proceed with future discussions as well. Because you're right, in SpeedGrader, they can't see what other students can't see what you're putting, but they could see what you respond in the actual discussion thread.
Yeah, and the only thing I think to get a response out of students a second time would get me in trouble, which basically would be to insult someone and get them so angry that they want to respond. That's not education.
Yeah, yeah. That might get a response, but probably not the response you were looking for. Yeah, so, and I know, and it is frustrating because as much as we want to get students to engage, there are some students that are just going to do the bare minimum that they have to do, and then they're going to move on. And but there are students that will, with the proper motivation, and if we can, let them know that the teacher presence is there, that will extend that conversation. So thank you so much for those comments. So this post here, or this discussion prompt, is not going to make for a good discussion prompt, because what is a student going to be able to say after someone answers this question? So we have, explain what this means in your own words. And basically, if we have 18 students, we're going to have 18 variations on the same definition. That is not going to have students engage in any type of discourse. So here's an example, and I am not a math or science person, so this is one that I actually found online. There are some bizarre examples of correlation between non-related variables. Find an example of this, either a video or an article, give a brief summary, and cite the video or article or attach a link. So this is basically asking the same thing. Students still are going to have to understand what correlation does not equal causation means and what those terms mean. But this is going to provide a whole bunch of examples of that. And students are finding them. You're not having to find them. And then the students are going to be able to see those examples. And you probably would also say, make sure that you comment. You would want to add a little bit of further information on that. But this is something that would actually, hopefully, stir up some conversation. So let's look at some other types of discussions that you could engage in. So problem-based discussions, if you are familiar with problem-based learning, it's an approach to learning where, and it's done, was originally introduced in face-to-face learning scenarios, K-12 and higher education. But basically the instructor poses a problem and then gives the students the necessary resources that they can use to research, to find out more about the problem, to get some context. The students are given time to construct a solution, and they're applying what they've learned in their construction of a solution, so that learning is reinforced through application. And this can really be done with discussions, as well as in the face-to-face classroom. So an example of a problem-based discussion for a political science course, so it's asking students if government has a responsibility to safeguard the health of its population. So they're going to have to, first of all, come up with what they think, their opinion. It's asking them to tell the class if they think that the government is responsible to safeguard its citizens' health. And then they need to apply that to the government's response to the obesity epidemic. And then think of someone who might have a say on the issue. And so then they put themselves in that person's shoes and they come up with a post that would be from the perspective of that person. And then additionally, when they respond, they are responding still in the voice of that chosen role. Now, this would be a discussion that I would say you would definitely need to have probably a rubric for the assessment piece, so students are very aware of how they're going to be assessed. And you would also want to have probably an example of a work or an example of what you're wanting from them. But this is an example of a problem-based discussion that you could have students do. And these are time-consuming, so this is going to be time-consuming for the students, and it would probably be a little more time-consuming for you. So this is an example of, this might be one discussion over a couple of weeks. And again, you would probably, if you're doing this type of discussion, you would probably not have this every week. That would be too much. But this would be something that you might have one of problem-based discussion in your course, or one or two over the course of the semester. So project-based discussions, this is another idea that students will take the lead. So you would have students choose groups or assign them groups, give them a chapter or a concept, some assigned content, and then they generate that open-ended prompt for their classmates and provide relevant sources. So this really helps to have the students, they've got to read over the sources, they have to come up with the question, and it creates ownership of the concepts and the material for the students that are doing the work to create the question, because they're coming up with that question for their classmates. Now, we want, one great way to have a good conversation online is to promote divergent thinking. So the ability to consider many possible solutions instead of just one is divergent thinking. So if there's a prompt that has a lot of different possible answers, the students can kind of brainstorm. This is what leads to great conversation. When there's only one right answer, there's not much for students to say beyond good point or nice job. but this is going to allow students to come up with a lot of different responses. So this example from a biology course, in this example, this is actually assigning students to a viewpoint. So it's asking if the GMO golden rice should be given to developing countries for free. And it's assigning half the class to be on the pro side and the other half to be on the con side. And so it's almost like a debate approach where you might not actually, the student who's assigned to the pro team might not actually believe that it's a good idea, but they still have to take that side and argue it. And again, this is going to really require the students to have a deep understanding of the issues, and then also they're going to work together. So again, this would probably be another thing that you would maybe put into a group instead of having the whole class have one discussion thread. You might start them off in a group and then move them all into the main discussion thread once they've come up with their argument. All right, so we're going to talk about blooms a little bit. So application is sort of on the middle level of blooms. And allowing students to apply what they've learned discussions are a great vehicle for that. So I really like this first example of an application question for chemistry. So it just says, in your environment, find a situation where two or more substances with different densities are interacting. Share a picture and explain how you know that the two substances have different densities. So you could get all kinds of interesting pictures and responses to this, and you would have students that are explaining what would happen if the densities of the two substances were reversed and the real world consequences of the difference in the density. So this is requiring students to take pictures, and all of these different pictures that the students are going to see, this is additional exposure to elements of this concept of density. This next one would be a literature or history idea that learners create a text exchange between two characters, and this probably would be done maybe halfway through the course or toward the end of the course. And so they have, either two literature characters or maybe two historical characters that are having a text conversation, and the rest of the class guesses who those people are. And then this third one, computer science, if you had the resources to design a computer with a brand new user interface, what would your priorities be? Make a rank ordered list of the qualities you'd like to have in your user interface. For each quality, provide a specific example and explain why you included it in your list. So again, students are going to have a good understanding of what a user interface is and what the features and characteristics are, and an understanding of why those are important, because they're going to need to rank them. So having that knowledge and also being able to apply it. Now, these are an example of probably if you were going to do this type of discussion question, you would want to set your settings so that students can't see what other students have posted until they've posted themselves, so that they're not, copying what other students have already put. And at the end, I'll talk about settings a little more if anybody needs to see what the settings or how to get to those settings. So a couple of other application type questions. What if prompts? So for an American history, how do you think the era of Reconstruction would have been different if Lincoln had not been assassinated? This is going to require students to know what actually did happen in Reconstruction and to think about what would have been different if Lincoln had still been alive during that time. Or what if Earth's gravity was twice as great as it is now? Again, they have to understand the effects of gravity before they can explain what would be the result of twice as much gravity. So with your discussion prompts, we just talked about a lot of application questions. So that's kind of the third level of good old Bloom's taxonomy. And so we want to really kind of stay at application or above when it comes to discussion questions. So these, remember, just recalling facts and understanding a lot of times there's only going to be one right answer down here. So we really want to stick with the apply or above. So analyze, having students examine, classify, or question course materials to draw their own conclusions. Evaluating, asking students to form an opinion. This is one of the ways that we really can get students involved, because if it's something that they can form an opinion about and defend it, a lot of times they're going to have more to say. And of course, it's not just going to be an opinion based on nothing. They're going to have to base it on what they have learned in the class. And then creating, which is the highest level, asking students to use what they've learned to create something. So we're going to look at some examples of these different levels of Bloom's. So analytical questions are going to be based on readings and lectures. Again, we're not having students just come up with baseless opinions. But for example, one here for psychology, we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that human beings are inherently good, where Thomas Hobbes disagreed. Do you believe humans are inherently good? Why or why not? So they're going to need to be able to base their answer on what they've learned. And again, for biology here, are the theories that Darwin presented in On the Origin of the Species anti-religion? Why or why not? Well, they're going to have a good understanding of origin of the species before they can answer this question. So evaluation questions, and these are opinions, and sometimes these might be the ones that could get a little heated if you've got students that have differing opinions, but sometimes that's good, because that is the way we get students to really get involved in a discussion. Of course, we don't want, students insulting each other, or Howard, are you insulting them? No, just kidding. But we do want disagreement sometimes really can help discourse. So, excuse me, I feel like I'm losing my voice here. So this is an example that actually in the Reading 3 class here at the college is used in the online version of the class, but it could also be a child psychology question. So students read an article and a textbook reading about violent video games and whether they encourage adolescents to act in violent ways. And it's kind of, there's evidence on both sides. So the students have to decide where they fall on that question and provide evidence and their own experience as well, possibly, to come up with an answer. There is a controversy still over ESL and whether direct instruction or immersion is the better method for students that don't speak English to learn English. So this could be another great way to have students share their opinions based on what they've read. And then another great source, depending on what your topic is, current events. So I know Rich Cummings, my colleague, teaches he's criminal justice class, and he does this type of question all the time for things that have been in the news. So there was just recently a mother convicted on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. I actually got this question from the New York Times, generates current event questions for students. And so do you think it's fair for parents to be held accountable for the actions of their children? Why or why not? So anytime that you can pull in current events and then also experiences of students. So we have students that come from all kinds of different backgrounds, different ages, and they all are going to come with different experiences. And again, depending on your course and what you're teaching, there's different ways that you can allow students to share those experiences. So one type of discussion that really could be done in any type of class is to have learners share what they already know. And this could really be done no matter what the topic. And it can create a baseline. So at the beginning of the course, or perhaps at the beginning of a new chapter, or before you start teaching a new concept, you can have them share what do they already know about this topic. And it can create the baseline so that as they learn more, this is a kind of a way to gauge how they've grown in their knowledge of this area. It allows learners to be active participants in their knowledge construction. Got some metacognition going on where they're sort of aware of where they started and they're thinking about where they're going as they're learning more about the concept. And the great thing about this type of discussion is that all students can participate. So students, whether they know anything about the topic or not, they can still participate and say, yeah, I don't really know much about this. The other great thing about this type of discussion is this is a really good community building opportunity, because especially in an online class, you might have students that think they are the only ones who don't know much about a certain topic, when probably they're not. And so if you have one student that says, yeah, I don't really know much about this, that kind of makes others feel more comfortable with saying, yeah, I don't either. And then they feel safer in participating in the discussion. And you can also use this to inform your upcoming instruction. So they might know a lot more or a lot less than what you thought they would. Or there might be some misconceptions that come up that you see that you need to address before you start talking about or teaching the new concept. So this is a great way to really see where your students are and see what they already know. So on the topic of creating that social presence and that learning community, there's just a couple ideas that you could do that are kind of fun that really could apply to any class. So I liked this idea: have students create or find a meme that describes how they feel about whatever the topic is, the class. Just if it's at the beginning of class and just how they're feeling in general. But there's a lot of ways that you could kind of use this as a fun way for students to all share something a little different. And then they would have to describe or tell why they chose that particular meme. And again, studies have shown that students who are familiar with each other are more likely to contribute in class and on a discussion board. So the more you can kind of get them familiar with each other and feel like they do know each other, even though they're not seeing each other in person, the more likely they are to continue to contribute to discussions. So another idea is ask students to give each other advice. So pose a question, ask them to pose a question that they're still confused about, or a topic that they could use some more clarification on. And then they can post to each other's questions or topics that they need an explanation for. And being able to explain something to someone else is one of the great ways to really cement our own learning and to make sure that all the students are on the same page. So you can also, after you give them some time to respond to each other, then that's a great opportunity for you to be able to address anything, maybe not in the discussion board, but in another way in the course, on anything that you're seeing that students are struggling with. Creating a get to know you video. This is really one that would probably be toward the beginning of class. And it could either be optional for students that would rather just type, they can do that, or you might make it mandatory, they have to do a video. But don't forget that video option is in there, because it is a great way to have students be able to get to know each other a little better by putting a face with a name. Another fun idea I found, 2 truths and a lie. So if you've ever done this as kind of an icebreaker at an event, you could use it just as, everyone tells two truths and a lie about themselves. It could be like an icebreaker at the beginning of the semester. But you could also, if you have a concept, you could have 3 examples or applications of a concept, 2 that are correct and 1 that's false. And the other students will comment on 2 others' posts and what their guesses are. And then you could have the original poster do kind of a reveal at the end and say which ones were true and which was a lie. But they're going to have to be able to understand the concept in order to do this. So I'm going to stop here for just a minute. If anyone has an example of a discussion that they've done that's worked particularly well, if you want to share that. If not, I can move on, but
I'm not following your advice because on an online course on the technology of a smartphone, it's only a 1 hour reading course. So I have a discussion question for each week.
okay.
I pose a question because I want the students to read something or to think about a particular issue. And that seems to be working well, but not as well as I wanted to, because it's easy to get a discussion going in a classroom. It's near impossible online, except for the awarding of additional points for every time you make a comment, you get additional points. That is helping with some students, but not with everyone.
Mm-hmm. So I read there was one article that I read where there was an instructor who she didn't give points for just posts in general. She gave points for posts that furthered the conversation. So if it was a question that was asked of the original poster, or but what about, or maybe a counterpoint, something that furthered the discussion, that's what got the students points, not just, if they just agreed or just kind of restated something that someone else already said, they didn't get points for that. So I don't know if that's something that you might consider. Instead of just giving out points to anybody that posts, they have to actually do something that's going to further the conversation.
Well, each of the discussion questions has a matrix as to what you get full points for and less than that.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's a number of sentences. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I had something called smartphones and stupidity. Do you agree with the statement? The smartphone allows us to offload the work of remembering to our technology. Please explain why, either A, no, or yes, or explain why. A no or yes answer is not acceptable. A minimum of 10 sentences required. You may want to include some examples if appropriate.
Okay.
And I've got very interesting comments on that.
Okay, yeah. And I think that would be, it's an open-ended, so it's not, nobody's probably going to have the same answer as somebody else or the same exact reasoning.
Right, because the quizzes are designed to test knowledge, the things they've read. The discussions, I want the students to think for themselves.
Right.
Hopefully, one of the questions was, if you could design an app for a cell phone, what new app would you want to design? And I want you thinking out of the box. And I
I
got
love
some
that.
very interesting suggestions.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think both of those are great questions. They're both open-ended and they both are having them apply what they know or what they've learned to the question. And I'm sure that you did get a lot of so that's, I love that one especially because it allows students to kind of get creative with their response. Now,
Yeah,
did you
and
have did that generate more of a discussion?
no,
That
it's
question?
basically, I've only had a couple of cases where one student is pretty good at responding a second time. The rest of the class is not. But this semester, unlike other semesters, I've gotten some very detailed answers, and I am really impressed with the quality of the answers.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And honestly, I remember when I was in doing my grad school classes online, and there were times where I knew I probably should say a little more on the discussion, but I just didn't have time, and so I didn't. So, I mean, there may be times where you've got students in there that are just, you know, they're strapped for time, and no matter how great your discussion is, there's going to be students in there that are only going to do the bare minimum, unfortunately. Um, but I definitely think that you're on the right track with your prompts, because they do sound like they're quality ones that the students can really sink their teeth into and show their knowledge, and be able to kind of hopefully build off of each other. Although I know that that is the challenge. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want you to have to, you know, reinvent the wheel, but maybe like the idea of sort of assigning points for things that continue a conversation instead of just posts in general. Um, and I can also, you know, think of some, if I can come up with any other ideas for helping get those conversations continued.
It's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
A challenge I'm actually looking forward to, because I
Yeah.
imagine if I do this enough, I may find a solution that works for this particular course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can, you know, and I can also even, you know, try to brainstorm with you, or see if what I can come up with as well. Um, so thank you. The both of those are really good ideas. So thank you for sharing that.
You're
Um,
welcome.
so just a couple of other things, and then we'll be finished for today. So some other considerations. Um, I do. I am a proponent of informal optional threads. Now, in my class that I taught, my cyber cafe, or I think I called it Anyone Ask, Anyone Answer. I don't think I had any activity in that all semester. I've been in classes and seen classes where the just open optional, you know, basically kind of any kind of question goes and anyone can answer another student's question, get a lot of activity. So it is nice to have it in there just in case. And sometimes it can make your life easier if you have, you know, something that gets a lot of questions, like general things, and one student can answer it, or you can answer it in one place, and that can kind of make your life easier. Now the number of students, and I don't know, Howard, if this is something that you've played with at all, but there's different research. So I sort of saw a range of numbers, but like 7 to 10 minimum, unless it's like a group project in a discussion at a time, where with a group discussion, you might have maybe just 5, but 20 to 30 max is kind of what they say. So if you've got, I mean, here I think we have 29 is the most for an online class, but some people combine sections. So if you've got 50 students in a group, that's kind of too much. It's going to create a pretty unwieldy, huge discussion. So I don't know if your class is a little smaller, Howard, or is it?
Classes anywhere for about 12 students, so it's a small group.
Okay, so I think that's probably like a good size for a good discussion. You're kind of right there in toward the lower end. But I do think that if for someone that might have a huge group of people, that it's probably better to break it into groups. We already talked about using video instead of text. Again, if you give them the option, I would probably never use the video option if I have a choice, but some people might prefer that. So giving choice is always nice when you can. And then using Canvas's discussion settings strategically. So it sounds, Howard, like you're probably pretty familiar with how to set it up so that students have to post before they can see the posts of others. Are you pretty familiar with Canvas's discussions
Yes,
settings?
I've gone through that. Originally, I got some help. In fact, you guys were good on the initial instruction on how to use Canvas. So
Oh, good.
I made it taken advantage of a lot of those features in setting these discussions up.
Okay, good, good. Because I think that's important too. In certain discussions, it's not necessary to set that up, but in a lot of things where you want everyone to sort of have an original idea, it's nice to be able to set it so they can't see what anyone else wrote until they post themselves. So that I don't think we'll need to demonstrate. So that is what I have for you today. Oh, and do you do the 2 due dates, Howard?
Do I do what? Oh, yes,
Two,
I use the due dates. And what I've done on this course is I've set up the discussions well in advance, so they appear magically at the right time.
okay, perfect, perfect. It's kind of stinks in Canvas that you can't actually set 2 due dates for one discussion. So you just have to kind of put it in your directions and say, you have to post your original post by Wednesday and your respond to 2 others by Saturday night or whatever the case may be. I think that's something that they are considering doing, because I know that's been a request to be able to enforce 2 due dates. But I'm not sure if that's coming at any time soon. So that's just another thing that I recommend.
It's there now. I'm looking at it. You can set a due date, you can set available from, and have an end date as well.
You're right. You can do a due date and an until date. You're correct with that. I think what they're wanting is to be able to just put 2 due dates in so that it comes up in their to-do list. But you could do the due date and the availability date separate if you wanted to do it that way. So that's a good point. All right. So this the slide deck is going to be in the Canvas Faculty Hub along with the recording. So if anybody needs the resources, I think I have one more that I need to add onto here that I forgot. So are there any questions or comments, anything else that anybody wants to ask about or share?
No, thank you very much. You've got me thinking, and that's why I wanted to attend this session.
Okay, great. I'm so glad that you did. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you sharing. It's nice to hear from someone that uses message boards a lot and thoughtfully, and have them share some ideas as well. So here's my email address if anyone needs it, if you've got any questions or anything that comes up. And then of course, here is the e-learning inbox as well. So the recording of this will be in the Canvas Faculty Hub. And so thank you so much, Sarah and Howard. I really appreciate you joining me today.
Okay, have a great evening.
All right, thanks. You do the same. You take care.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Jenny. Bye.
Bye.